Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea, and I work at the Reach Museum in Richland, Washington. And we are excited to celebrate World Fish Migration Day with you today. And we have with us today Ralph Lampman, and he works for Yakama Nation Fisheries and their Pacific Lamprey project. And he is going to talk to you about the plight and curious life of an ancient vampire fish. So thanks for joining us, Ralph, and go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Reach Museum, for hosting this this webinar. Yeah, like Andrea said, my name is Ralph Lampman. I work for the Yakama Nation Fisheries Pacific Lamprey Project. A lot of people call me Lamprey Man, just because of the last name sounds like lamprey. But yeah, we'll be sharing a little bit about their biology. They're really important for the tribes culturally and as a food source, medicine, and so we're trying to restore this species here in the Pacific Northwest. So I also want to give a shout out to the World Fish Migration Day. It's actually happening this Saturday on October 24th. There's a lot of events happening all over the world, 350 locations in many countries. A lot of these events are done remotely because of COVID, but there's still a lot of exciting ones you can check out. There's also a fish song contest. The finalists will be announced on that day, and documentaries and discussion forum. So please check it out. On the 24th, there's a series of events happening throughout the day. This is Central European time, so I put out the Pacific Standard Time on the left here. So starting around midnight, going all the way till the afternoon. And we'll be sharing a video about the lamprey also on the 24th at 10 a.m. So after 10 a.m., you'll still have a chance to check out a couple of these events. For fish, migration is really important. They use the river to get to, all the places for spawning and rearing. And but there's a lot of dams, as you can see in this slide. These are just the dams on the main stem Columbia Snake River. 14 to 15 dams on each of these rivers. There's over 250 dams. If you look at the smaller tributaries. So there's lots of things that kind of gets in the way for fish like lamprey. This star shows kind of where the Pacific lamprey distribution ends right now, because there's no passage above Grand Coulee Dam. But historically, they were able to go much, much further, up into the British Columbia, Canada. So those are some of the issues that lamprey face. So now, this is what Pacific lamprey looks like up close. A lot of people might think of Star Wars characters. They're really unique and different. I tend to think of them, they remind me of babies in my case. I'll explain that in a little bit. So my first son, Micah Lampman, his middle name is Pacific Lampman, just to make it sound like Pacific lamprey. My wife was okay with that. There's a lot of similarities between babies and lamprey. One thing, they're nocturnal, active at night. That's when they roam around, and that tends to be the case with babies too. They're both great at sucking, and they're parasitic to their host, their moms in the case of babies. And they're really impossible to read their mind. It's hard to tell what they're thinking, and so that's my job as a research biologist, trying to figure out, what secrets they have under their sleeves. And Micah was a surprise baby. He, I was starting to take these lamprey pills from Japan, and it had some unintentional consequences after I started taking these. So, lamprey, a lot of people tend to think of lamprey as an ugly fish, but I just want to make the case that, really depends on, what you look at. If you really zoom in on, our mouth, it's pretty ugly as well. And we tend to focus kind of on this one part of their body parts, but, we need to look at the overall, the big picture. And if you actually observe them underwater, you actually never see these teeth because they're always sucked on, and they're actually pretty cute in my opinion. There's a lot of unique things about lamprey. They don't have any bones. They have a cartilage similar to sharks. They only have a couple types of fins, dorsal fins and caudal fin, the tail fin. They have these gills on their sides. That's how they breathe, and nostril just on their top of their head. They're really old species, ancient species that goes way back. Dinosaurs are about 200 million years old, but they're actually 450 million years old. So they go way, way, way back. So if you think of lamprey, as a 100-year-old grandpa and grandma, humanity is basically a 2-week-old baby. So we're still wearing diapers, and we only know how to cry. So that's how much, lamprey have seen all the changes that happen on Earth. Lots of mass extinction events has happened, at least 4 to 5, and they have survived all those things. And Pacific lamprey is one type of lamprey species. There are many other species in the Northwest. These are some examples. Most of them are a little smaller than the Pacific lamprey. Some of them only live in the freshwater rivers and streams, so they stay pretty small. I just want to note that there's lots of different species. And, you might wonder, why do we need Pacific lamprey? There's if you break it down into, the key things, there's 4 things I want to stress. One is that, they're really important for the tribes, important food source, medicine. This is from Willamette Falls, where they harvest lamprey. Many of the tribes go there to harvest lamprey. But they're not only important for humans, but also for many other species, mammal species, bird species, fish species. They depend on lamprey at various life stages of the lamprey. They're also considered to be important in reducing the salmon predation that occurs. They're, things like sea lions and bird predators. They actually, a lot of them would prefer lamprey because they're easier target. They're slow swimming, but they're really high in fat and calories. So, if we had more lamprey, it would help reduce the predation that we're seeing on salmon. But there's also the role that larvae plays. We're starting to know more about them, but they're basically like an earthworm underground, and they're doing a lot of nutrient recycling, which helps other species. And just to stress the point about how they're important for the tribal nations, they historically they were harvested and they're smoked or dried, and sometimes they're called Indian hot dogs, where they would cut them up and put them in hot dog buns and eat them that way. Yeah, they're just really important food source for the tribes. And there's also cultural stories that are told about lamprey. But it's not, Native Americans that feed on lamprey. They're, all over the world. It's a delicacy, in Europe and Asia. These are some of the pictures of some of the recipes. They have like sausages and stir fry, many recipes. My personal favorite is the raw lamprey. It tastes just like salmon when they're raw. And they're, considered a superfood because they're really high in nutrition. Probably they're one of the most nutritious seafood in the world. They're really high in vitamins, minerals, fatty acids. Basically, if you just eat one lamprey, which is about 400 grams, you meet most of the, the daily intake needs for the day. And there's some of the things like vitamin A and B12, omega-3, which are your healthy fat, which are important for your brain functions. It's really high. So, they're actually, in terms of calorie, they're smaller than salmon, full-size salmon, but they have about the same amount of calorie. And in terms of nutrients, they're actually much more nutritional than salmon. But there's a lot of, unwanted stereotypes and biases coming from sea lamprey. In the Great Lakes, after the canal was built, they were able to get into some of these Great Lakes, and they started, feeding on some of the fish that didn't really evolve with lamprey. So it has been an issue over there. So they're considered evil species. There's a few shows you can see about lamprey. There's a Blood Lake video you can see on Netflix. So lots of bad reputation from there, but Pacific lamprey here in the Northwest they're native, and they're as native as they can get. They were here first, and salmon were the ones that kind of came in later. If you look at the evolutionary history, there's 3 different life stages, main life stages of lamprey: larva, juvenile, adult. Sometimes they're called ammoset or macrothalmia. Those are just hard to pronounce and spell names that lamprey biologists use just to sound smart and intelligent. But they really change as they transform into like the juvenile. They're filter feeder as a larvae. Then they start to get their teeth, and then they head out to the ocean and feed on the blood of other host fishes. Their life cycle is pretty long. I show example of coho salmon here. Those are about 3 years old typically. Pacific lamprey are at least 10 years old. They spend a long time in the freshwater, and then they head out to the ocean. And we used to think that they only spend 2 to 3 years, but now we're finding out that the norm might be 5 to 6 years, based on some of the genetic work we've done. So they could be, 12, 13 years for their, when their whole life cycle is pretty long. They're considered keystone species, indicator species, or ecological engineer. Usually those terms are reserved for like salmon or beavers, which make beaver dams and really change the habitat. But lamprey really does all those things. I want to hit those points in the next few slides. These are just examples of the host fish that lamprey feed on. They feed on, fish that are a little bigger than themselves, and they feed on the blood and body fluids. They don't necessarily kill the host fish, kind of like your blood donation. You get a little blood, and that really doesn't affect you. It might, weaken the fish a little bit. And that really depends on, how much blood is taken, but they're really opportunist feeders. So whatever is really abundant in the ocean, that's really what they go after. So they, in a sense, they're helping, keep the food chain in check and making sure the top predators are not out of balance. This is a video of the adult lamprey spawning. So the male is sucking onto the female's head, coiling its tail, and making a little dance. And the eggs are pretty small, so hard to see, but they release them into this nest called red. And these are kind of the nest, kind of what they look like. Basically pizza-shaped hole in the ground, pretty similar to salmon, but you'll see kind of smaller rocks and sand in those holes, and that's where they lay their eggs. This is the kind of the early life stage when after the eggs are fertilized, they hatch in about a couple weeks. And then it takes another couple weeks for them to become feed-ready larvae, as you can see on the lower left. The lower right is the pro-larvae, still has a yolk sac attached, so they're still feeding off of that. This is the pro-larvae just right after they hatch. Oops, go back. Let's see. So at this stage, they're not really, some of them starting to move, but that's what they look like at the pro-larvae stage, really small, about 1 centimeter or less than 1 centimeter at this stage. And then when they turn into larvae, they're underground, so you don't really see them much. They're kind of like earthworm. They're feeding off of the detritus, things that are breaking down like leaves or salmon carcass. During the day, they tend to burrow further down. So they help till the silt and sand and aerate it, adding oxygen, making it a better place for other bugs and other things that live in the fine sediment. This is a video of the larvae. When you release them in the river or stream, they go right down into the sediment. They know that they're easy predator. They just look like a worm. So they go right into the fine sediment to hide from predators, and that's where they do their feeding. This is a cartoon, look at, what the lamprey does, in the stream and rivers. This is from Japan, but, organic matter comes into the rivers and streams, and, they get digested by, things like lamprey, and then nutrients get recycled, and then they, float downstream. So lamprey are basically like a microbe in your gut, and you need these important microbes to have healthy poop. And if you don't have those, you're going to have diarrhea. So, basically, rivers and streams without these important species, you're just going to have a bad, digestion, really need those microbes, those good, important things in your gut to have healthy digestive system. And it's the same for rivers and streams. So they're considered keystone species in that aspect. But they're also a keystone species because there's many predators that depend on lamprey. These are just some of the well-known predators that feed on lamprey. these are some of the action shots. You can see a lot of bird and fish and mammal species depend on lamprey. This is an eagle, bald eagle, snatching a lamprey from a sea lion, or seal, I'm sorry. You can see it had an opportunity to grab it, just went right for it and snatch it out of the mouth of the seal. In Japan, they're also considered an indicator species, and that's because they really use all the different habitat that rivers and streams offer. So like the adults are more into the fast water habitat, kind of deep pools and riffles where they can hide. The larvae likes the slow water habitat, you know, with the sand and silt. And then, you know, they're for holding, you know, spawning. They also go to the shallow water gravel habitat. So they really need all these, you know, not only the habitat, but also the different types of sediment, you know, rocks, silt, boulders, gravel. They need all of those. And salmon are usually happy with just gravel, but lamprey really needs all these diversity of rocks and silt. But lamprey numbers have dropped down, you know, compared to historical numbers. This is from Bonneville Dam and McNary Dam. You can see, you know, in the early 1900s, the numbers were more abundant. And right now it looks really low. Like if you look at McNary Dam, the red line there, if this was a human pulse, you could probably say they're pretty much dead. There's just not enough fish that are getting, you know, further upstream in the Columbia River. And there's a long period where they just stopped counting lamprey because there are just too many, and they didn't see the importance. So we don't have data for a long period. And there's many, you know, what caused the decline? There's definitely a lot of different sources of threat, you know, issues that have caused this, you know, passage, dewatering, like in diversions, happens a lot in canals, and there's invasive species, you know, bass and you know, northern pike minnow. They're native, but they're still abundant in a lot of the dam reservoirs. You know, host species that they depend on in the ocean are getting depleted. Water quality issues, you know, lots of issues. But here in the Yakama Basin, you know, all these issues are present. So, you know, but we're hoping by doing the restoration work here in a basin like Yakama Basin, if we can restore them here, we think it'll set a good example, you know, worldwide. So that's what we're striving for. You know, some of the threats that lamprey face as adults are passage. This is Bonneville Dam. You can see all the lamprey congregating in the corner. They're just not a fast swimmer. And when you have these 90-degree corners, they're not able to use their mouth to suck their way up. They just can't latch on those corners. This video shows an example of what that looks like. So they click on the wall, but you have these wearing it's really hard for them to attach. Small things like grabbing the corner help lamprey but almost need it, but there's a little for them detach.
Hey Ralph, I'm just going to
yes.
pop on for a second and just let you know that when you play the videos, we can't hear you. So you might have to talk either before or after the videos.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
Thanks. This is These are lamprey passage structures that are being built. It started at Bonneville Dam, and now they're being built in Tribs as well. Here in the center picture is Prosser Dam. We have these vertical wetted wall. It just has a little bit of water that comes down, and lamprey are able to suck their way up. So these are really helping lamprey pass. Now over 50% of the fish are using these small little pathways, passage routes that are made for lamprey. And just to show what that looks like, this is the lamprey climbing up these vertical wetted walls. So as you can see, it takes a little bit of effort for them to get up, but normally, it takes hours and days for these lamprey to pass dams. So, compared to that, this is a really easy path for them to climb up. For larvae, there's other issues that they face. Like this is lamprey getting desiccated and dying, drying up and dying on the banks in canals. They're really small. Like the newborn lamprey larvae are really tiny. Like I said, less than 1 centimeter. So a lot of these fish screens are built for salmon. So what's small enough for salmon to be prevented from going through fish screens, lamprey are they just go right through. So that's an issue for lamprey. We don't have a solution yet, but we're working on ways to reduce the entrainment in these canals. This is a video of lamprey just drying up in one of these canals in the Yakama Basin. Oops. Let's see here. It's freezing, so I'll just skip through that one. So we're doing a lot of work. Yakama Nation Fisheries has been, one of the leaders to try to restore lamprey. We do what's called translocation, where we pick up the lamprey, adult lamprey, from lower Columbia dams, and we bring them to the Yakama Basin, Wenatchee, and Methow Basin to let them spawn. We rescue the fish that are in canals. We do artificial propagation to rear them, and we're doing some work to release these larvae as well. Just to give you a quick overview of the activities. And our goal is really to bring back lamprey, back to this state when they used to be more abundant. This is from Willamette Falls, 1913. So over 100 years ago, but they were just, you can walk on top of their back in some of these rivers and streams. That's what we hope to bring back, which will be good for salmon, good for the tribes, and really good for the whole ecosystem. This is my son eating lamprey. I think he was 1 or 2 years old at this time. He had a cracker in his hand, but he really preferred the lamprey. So, if babies are, if they like lamprey, that must mean it's really good for them. I'll show that. If I can show that video, I'll play that here. Smoked in. And yeah, it was served at down in Coquille River. There's a South Coast Lamprey Summit, and we had a chance to harvest lamprey and cook them, and it was really delicious. So we really hope, the tribes have a chance to, to serve lamprey, not just for a ceremonial feast, but also, it used to be more of a daily feed. And so we hope that we could bring that back. I want to thank the Pacific Lamprey team members, Tyler Beals, Davey Lumley, Sean Gowdy, Shkina Saluskin. These are part of our team, and they do a lot of the work. So with that, I want to open up to questions. And I also put my contact info if there's any questions. We do have public outreach events where we show these adult lampreys and larval lampreys. And when we do translocation, we try to invite the public. We weren't able to do that this year due to COVID, but hope we can do that soon. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Ralph.